Hey y'all. So next up, we're going to talk about willingness. And willingness is about the readiness to respond to life situations wisely as needed, voluntarily, and without grudge. And willingness and the skills that go along with willingness can be really helpful when it feels very challenging, if not impossible, to accept reality and to practice turning the mind or some of the ideas around reality acceptance. So let's start off defining what willingness is. I often find that it's easiest to understand what willingness is by first taking a look at its opposite. And here I love this cartoon that goes over some key antonyms, opposites for what willingness is. So unwillingness, reluctance, apathy, aversion, indifference, outright denial or refusal, a disinclination, or even a dissent against what is there. And if we continue to build on this and take a closer look at what is willingness and what is willfulness, at first we'll go off with willfulness. So willfulness in practice for many of us can look like trying really hard to control events, those around you, and so on. It can look like trying to control experience or trying to avoid or escape from it. It can involve denying life or refusing to be a part of life altogether. It can involve giving up instead of doing what is needed in the situation, say throwing the towel in or throwing your hands up. It can be holding back, saying no, saying yes, but, or imposing your will on reality, trying to fix everything and denying what is there or refusing to accept what is there. Often, for many of us, when we are feeling willful, it looks like doing the opposite of what works, what is necessary or needed. It can look a lot like focusing entirely on ourselves, on our own needs, or I know this is true for me. Like, I know that I am feeling willful when I feel like I'm really strongly holding to some grudge or bitterness about what it is that is happening or has happened. Um, and so, with this in mind, it starts to paint a picture of like, what would the opposite of this look like? What is willingness then? And willingness is exactly the other side of the coin of a lot of the things I just mentioned. So willingness is often accepting what is and responding in an effective way. It is doing what works and just what is needed. It is focusing on both individual, your needs, and also common or shared needs, the needs of others, the thoughts and feelings of others. Um, it can be throwing yourself into life without reservation, wholeheartedly. Or I think of this often like the participate skill, like fully participating in the present moment exactly as it is. Um, Willingness can also look like choosing to say yes to the mystery and uncertainty of life and of what it means to kind of be alive. Um, and for many of us, myself included, I feel like I often feel most connected to willingness when I am responding from wise mind, meaning where I feel really connected to wise mind. And so, if this is important, if moving towards willfulness to willingness is really important in moments where it's necessary and effective to accept reality and to be able to practice the skill of turning the mind, um, let's talk through how we get there. So, first, we need to observe that we're feeling willful. Um, and so often, this is why mindfulness is discussed, right, as the core of every skill. That, like, in order to move towards what is effective, we first have to observe that we're feeling willfulness. And here, the goal is to observe it, meaning identify it, label it, describe it, experience it, and use some of those core mindfulness, like what and how skills to observe that willingness has shown up for you, to describe what it looks like for you, and to label it in that moment, which for me often involves saying something like, I notice that I'm feeling really willful right now. I notice that I'm really clenching my fist. I'm really like wanting to push away from this or push this out of my mind. Um, and that gives us the opportunity to move towards the second step, which is radically accepting that at this moment you feel and may be acting in accordance with willfulness. Denying willfulness is not helpful. In the way that we talk about radical acceptance, um, you cannot fight willfulness with willfulness. So if we're unwilling to accept that we're feeling willful, or if we try to deny our willfulness or push it away, often we find we just get stuck in a loop. And in essence, what is really needed is practicing the same skill of radical acceptance towards willfulness, accepting that that is exactly what we are feeling and where we're at in that moment. And once we do that, we can move towards turning the mind, which is turning the mind towards acceptance and willingness, and turning your mind away from reality rejection or willfulness, and turning your mind towards participating in reality exactly as it is. And if you're having trouble doing so, there are two really helpful skills that we'll jump into next in more detail: Halfsmile and willing hands, which can help us to physically connect to willingness in a way that makes it more possible to move away from willfulness towards willingness. And finally, if you're feeling like even with those skills, willfulness is still feeling really strong, really intense, it can be really helpful to ask yourself, what's the threat here? Meaning that often when we feel intense willfulness, there's some level of perceived threat about that we'll say lose something really big, that something terrible is going to happen, and that there's something dangerous out there about moving towards willingness, which might be true. But the idea here is to ask yourself what exactly the threat is, so that you can use other skills like check the facts to assess whether or not the threat is something that fits the facts of the situation. And really, like a movable willfulness also often involves some sort of expected catastrophe, meaning that we start saying to ourselves something like, not only is there a threat, not only is it dangerous to accept this, but I won't be able to deal with it. I won't be able to deal with what is there. And as a result, if we kind of hold to this expected catastrophe and expected lack of skillfulness, then it often leads to us again pushing away, ignoring, sticking with willfulness, which allows us to separate ourselves from the threat, from action or approach, rather than moving towards it. So in conclusion here on the topic of willingness, willingness is actively participating in reality. So it's often building off asking what the threat is. It's often what is actually needed to overcome a threat, because willingness isn't approval and it's not resignation to the threat. It's not lying down and letting yourself get rolled over or become passive to what's happening, but rather allowing yourself to stay fully engaged with what is there, so that if realistically there is a threat, that it won't be a catastrophe, that you'll be able to observe and describe what the threat is and connect to your wise mind to cope ahead, to other skills that are needed to help you behave, or help anyone, myself, behave in a way that is ultimately going to be effective, ultimately going to help prevent a catastrophe or disaster if one is possible, or ultimately lead you towards what is valued and consistent with your life worth living. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Halfsmile and willing hands, those two kind of behavioral skills that I flagged as part of this process of moving from willfulness to willingness. So Halfsmile and is kind of I include this picture of Mona Lisa because it's this Mona Lisa smile, where it's a physical way that we can accept reality with our body in the moment where willfulness is high or we're noticing it's difficult to open up to what is there. Um, and this skill comes from the fact that we know emotions are at least partially controlled by our facial expressions. So that even by adopting a half smile, a serene and accepting face, we can actually control and have a direct effect on our emotions in the moment. And so, for example, people often feel like more accepting, more calm, more open to experiences when their faces express acceptance. Um, and so, half smiling, say, when you're thinking about, for Tiffany, Brussels sprouts, for others in group, if you think about, for me, it's like really, really cold weather. And if you think about something that automatically brings up really strong willfulness or emotions for you, half smiling can help you feel more accepting of that thing, more understanding towards it, even if you still don't like it. And so it's a way of accepting reality with your body and helping to cultivate feelings of acceptance. So how do we half smile? Step by step, the first step is to relax, meaning to relax your face, your neck, your shoulder muscles. And it is definitely great to try to practice this along, even as you're watching the video, and see what this feels like for you. So first, go ahead, relax your face, neck, shoulders, and muscles. Then smile, meaning gently smile at the corner of your lips from the inside of your mouth. And you can think of that Mona Lisa picture. The smile doesn't have to be obvious. It doesn't have to be something other people would even notice, but just a subtle smile that you can feel within yourself. Connect with the idea of a serene or calm facial expression and try to adopt that. And know that as you continue in this moment to try to practice this half smile, that it can be subtle. Make sure that it is something that you feel, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is seen, because the goal here is to affect useful change on your inner experience, not necessarily to convey approval or positive emotion to someone else. So it's okay if it's only felt. Indeed, it must be felt, but not seen. Okay. Take a moment to let that settle in, to observe what you felt, even in this minute of practicing half smile. And then we'll move to willing hands, which is another way of physically accepting reality with your body. And it specifically involves holding the hands unclenched, if you can see my hands, palms up, fingers relaxed. I'm holding coffee, so that's all right. So like this. But ideally resting them on your leg or a chair or something where you don't have to put a lot of effort into holding your hands up. And so willing hands is a really important part of opposite action all of the way for anger. And this is because anger often shows up as the opposite of accepting reality, or a clue that we might be feeling willful or rejecting reality. And anger often says to us things like, what is should not be, it is unfair, or it is unacceptable that X happened. And anger, as a result, motivates us to change reality, to fight it, to overcome it. And this is a really vital function of anger, right? Like, we wouldn't want to change the function of anger unilaterally, because anger has its place. There are absolutely times when anger is not only justified, but very effective to act on and necessary to act on, where moving towards change is important, or fighting is important, like pushing against reality. But here we're practicing reality acceptance because it's also important at times to accept reality and to act opposite to anger in order to be effective. So, when do we practice willing hands? Which, again, if you take a moment to sit and do so, is really allowing the palms to be relaxed and open, allowing them to face towards the sky. If I'm going to rest them so they're off screen, but if you can also close your eyes or leave them open, relax your shoulders. It's great to practice this with your eyes open and closed because often in real life, day-to-day settings where you might want to practice willing hands, you might need to maintain eye contact or stay engaged in the activity or the conversation that you're having. And the great thing about willing hands, that for me and also Halfsmile, is that they're things that like no one needs to know that you're doing them, and also often no one notices or would notice that you're doing them, and they can be highly effective in opening us up to willingness. So hopefully you're still engaging in this practice where you're allowing your shoulders, your arms to be relaxed, your hands to be open, willing, soft. And just take a moment to see how this feels. If anything changes physiologically for you, meaning in your body, in the physical sensations that you're feeling, if anything changes in the quality of your experience, in how you're feeling emotionally, or the thoughts going through your mind. And we'll continue to practice this together and to talk about times that this might be indicated or useful and ways that it might be challenging to practice when we meet. But I'll emphasize that practice is a really critical part of progress for any skill in DBT. I love this graphic because it really brings to light like why it's so important to practice and practice and practice these skills of turning the mind that we just went over, and then willing hands and Halfsmile in a whole bunch of contexts, because it helps us understand what works and when it doesn't work, when challenges come up or when a different skill is needed. It helps us feel more mastery and to create new habits of moving towards this practice in the situation that we needed. And it helps us to feel more confident that we'd be able to move towards willingness when it's indicated and when it's effective or necessary. And so that we can practice this when emotions, especially when willfulness is really high. So with that in mind, it can be really helpful to practice willing hands and Halfsmile when you first wake up in the morning, for days consecutively, during any free moments you find in the day, where you're sitting at your computer, you're in a meeting, you're taking care of your kids, or on a walk, you're trying to exercise or do something, build another new habit. It can be helpful when you're listening to music or watching TV shows, other things that bring up strong emotions for you. It can be helpful when you're feeling irritated or noticing you're feeling irritable, to see and use these skills. Definitely practice it lying down, sitting up with your eyes closed and your eyes open. Generalizing it to all sorts of different experiences is so helpful. And the last one, which I think we'll practice together, but is a really useful and difficult one, is practicing this when you're contemplating a person or a thing that you really strongly dislike or hate. Someone you're really angry with, someone that just rubs you the wrong way, or a thing that does. So your Brussels sprouts or your cold weather, whatever the thing is that you feel brings up intense willfulness, because we all have those things. And then seeing what it feels like to practice Halfsmile and willing hands in that context. Okay. I look forward to seeing you and talking more about these skills when we next meet. Have a great rest of your day.